Hey everyone, welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil Laird, here for part one of my three-part Halloween comic book review series. You guys, it turns out there were enough comic books that I had in my horror comics box to do with the Halloween franchise that it is actually going to justify three different reviews. Just so you guys know, I'm going to be starting with Halloween Nightdance, the 4 issues that you saw in the thumbnail. I'm going to be continuing with, right here, Halloween 30 Years of Terror, which is, obviously, since this is the 40th anniversary this year, that is a 10-year-old comic. And then I've got both parts 1 and 2 of the 3-part Halloween, the first death of Laurie Strode. That actually third part never came out, so I'm going to be doing a separate episode for each of those two things right there, so stay tuned for that for part 2 and 3. But today I'm talking about Halloween Nightdance right here. So I'm being very careful with it because apparently these comics are worth quite a bit. I guess even the trade is a little bit pricey right now, let alone these individual issues. So I'm going to be handling them with care as I show you guys the art and stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and go through the comic. I'm going to tell you guys how it ties into the Halloween continuity, as well as I'm going to go over the story. I'm going to talk about the characters. I'm going to talk about the kills. I'm going to talk about the artwork. I'm going to talk about all of it here, you guys. It might be a bit more of an extended comic book review. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into these than I have typically in the past. With some of the comic book reviews. So here we go. This one actually takes place between Halloween H2O and Halloween Resurrection. This 4-issue arc takes place in that era, in the Halloween timeline. So that was confirmed by the Halloween fan wiki. So I consulted with this a lot while I'm reading through these comics this time around. So anyway, I'm going to basically start off with the story, which is about a couple of different things, honestly. There's a couple of different sets of characters that you're going to follow in this book, which you can get in trade paperback form. Sinister Cinema Reviews reviewed it on his channel, and it wasn't so much a review as much as him saying he wasn't a big fan of it, and then talking about the backup story in it. So I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into the actual crux of this 4-issue series. So we start off meeting this girl, Lisa, who has a very troubled past. She had something happen that has traumatized her, so she's very introverted. We meet her friends, Sean and Nikki, when she's at school, and they're even kind of ribbing her a little bit for attempting to come out of her shell and stuff like that. So it's sort of a typical setup, teen at school setup, high school situation. And then we also meet a character couple by the name of Ryan and Marcy. They are a very young married couple that are traveling to Russellville, which you'll know because it is the town adjacent to Haddonfield from the Halloween movie series. And basically they're going to Russellville because Marcy hasn't been able to reach her family for about a week. For whatever reason, they're always checking in with her, and she hasn't been able to talk to them in about a week. So they're going to go drive to Russellville and find out what's going on. Meanwhile, while we also have Lisa and her friends at school, we have Ryan and Marcy on their car ride. We also cut to a girl that is tied up, presumably by Michael Myers, and she, is just this typical sort of thin blonde that's tied up, but she hears a friend, and we see her sort of monologue, inner monologue, that's the way to put it, done in not thought bubbles, but the typical now comics. They don't use thought bubbles anymore. They just use captions on the side. So you see that she's, worried about her friend Ben, who she hears crying out in the next room, presumably being attacked somehow by Michael Myers. We do find very soon that this comic is willing to pack a punch when the girl ends up freeing herself from her bonds and silently crawling into the next room. And as she does, she sees Michael Myers sitting there with his back to her. I'll show you guys this page because it was actually a really good haunting page. And I should say right off the bat, this series was written by Stephen Hutchinson, and the artwork is done by Tim Seeley, who you guys may know is the creator of the Hack Slash comic book series. So it's very accomplished artwork, sort of independent looking for some people's standards, but I think it's actually very typical of independent horror comics, which is not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. So this right here is Ryan and Marcy. Oop, wrong side. I keep forgetting it's backwards. So that's the married couple. So that's Lisa and her friends. And it turns out Lisa is getting these letters in the mail that are drawings of her from a boy that she used to babysit by the name of Daniel. But the drawings are getting kind of weird, she's noticing. So then we, as I said, we meet this girl that's tied up, and she frees herself from her bonds, but she hears the guy, her friend Ben, but she also sees this cabinet full of Michael Myers masks, which if you watch this whole comic book series, this 3-part series, you'll know where those masks come from by the end of it. It's really interesting. It didn't tie in until the first issue of Laurie Strode right here. Right there. So it's really cool because the same guy wrote all of these issues. Even though they're 3 different series, the same guy wrote them, so there's a lot that ties in with them. Okay, so moving right along, we basically see the first taste of Carnage, and that's the page I initially went to show you. That is right here. You see her crawling out and Michael Myers sitting there with a jack-o'-lantern next to him, but then you see her friend Ben, who's been impaled in the throat by a spike and is on fire. So that's a pretty awesome, image, and you're like, oh, okay, so cool, we're gonna get some craziness in this, I like it, So things continue on from that point. So not long after that, we actually get a bit more carnage, believe it or not. There were, I think it was a total of, I have it written down here, there were a total of 6 kills in this 4-issue series. So it's a pretty good average, it's about, what is that, 1.7 something, 1.66 kills per issue, something like that. I don't know, you work out the math. But it's not a bad ratio. So you get the second kill in this particular issue, which is pretty interesting because it is, Ryan and Marcy happen to, get distracted in the woods, and when they do, the girl that her friend Ben was just strung up, she escapes the cabin, runs away from Michael Myers, and unfortunately runs out into the highway where she is greeted by Ryan and, right here, she is greeted by Ryan and Marcy's car, and it does not work out well for her. So I'm not going to ruin what happens because that's not necessarily the end of that girl's story, but it does cause Ryan and Marcy to get out of the car, and here's where we start to see the really cool thing that the artist does in this book. I will say this. There's some inconsistencies with the art in the early issues. Not many, but just a couple, where I'll show you at the end the comparison between Michael here on this page and Michael later on. And I guess it might just be a size issue, but nonetheless, what I really liked was Tim Seeley did an excellent job of portraying Michael as the Shape. He very much felt like the Shape instead of, the later entries slasher Michael Myers. He would come out of the shadows and inflict pain and suffering and then fade back into the shadows. And it was always really cool. So this is the first instance of this. So you see down here, let me get it on so you can see it. So he comes out of the shadows and gets closer and closer, and all you can see is the mask because it's dark and it's rainy. And then you get the money shot, of course, where he, stabs her directly through the chest. And then not only that, but she's reaching out for Ryan, for her husband, who's dealing with a head injury from the car wreck. Look at this cool impact spurt, It's really well done. Really, really cool. So he actually carries her back into the darkness as she reaches out for her husband. Save me! Like, oh my God. It's actually really, really cool when you look at it. Like, that's disturbing imagery right there. I really dig on this, quite frankly. That's one of the scenes that I really, really liked about the comic book series, even though overall, if I had to give it an overall thought, it's kind of not the best Halloween story. It's not the worst, but it's definitely not the best. It feels like sort of truncated, a little bit all over the place as far as Ryan's story after this. Basically, after this, he's kind of wandering around with a head injury, like not sure what to do, and then he just kind of like happens across the right thing to do later on in the series. So that's a little bit weird. I will say there's some weird choices made with the writing. There is something interesting that happens here at the end of issue 1 that leads into something. I'm basically going to hit on a couple of the really cool moments in the series rather than ruin the whole series for you guys. But this is one where Michael watches Lisa and her friend Sean drive off. This is one of the weird inconsistencies. Look at Michael's face there. Like, it doesn't look like Michael Myers at all. That's supposed to be him. That's just a weird art inconsistency. And maybe it's because of the scale. He had to put him behind bars. I don't know. It was just weird. But anyway, you see this cat coming down here and rubbing all on Michael Myers' legs. And that's the end. That's to be continued. That's issue 1. And there is a continuation of that cat's story. Not necessarily the best one. So beyond that, the story itself, as I said, is just a bit underwhelming. There's nothing that really is super crazy about tying it into anything. I mean, there's, you know, a couple of little things here and there, but nothing really amazing. No huge plot reveals, no big character twists or anything like that. We do find out that the person doing the drawings is not, in fact, the person that Lisa babysat. It's Michael, and he starts sending more and more weird drawings. So it adds this dimension that Michael does these sort of kid-like crayon drawings and sends them out. So that's sort of an interesting addition to the mythology, I suppose. Now in issue 2, we get the next kill of the series, which is, you know, I'm not trying to ruin everything for you guys, but I wanted to touch on the kills at least, because this is hard to come by. So you guys just probably want to know what happens. You know, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling it, I guess spoilers, but if you don't want to pay $60 for the trade paperback or even more for the single issues, this is the easiest way to find out what happens. So, in the second issue, we do get the death of, spoilers, Nikki. The one that Sean has feelings for, that Lisa points out he should try for. He ends up realizing, oh, I do have feelings for her, but the feelings are realized too late, because here we have Nikki at her house carving a jack-o'-lantern, and then she hears a knock, and suddenly someone's at the door reaching for her, and it is, of course, a tremendous splash page right here. Michael Myers grabbing Nikki by the hair and then strangling her out. And this actually leads to a moment. The writing was sort of, again, just kind of okay for me, but there were a couple of moments that really stuck out. This is one of those moments where this poor high school girl, Nikki, is, you know, being attacked. She's just been strangled and sort of incapacitated on the ground, catching her breath. And all she can think about are her family and friends. And then Michael stuffs an apple into her mouth. And he, you know, Michael's twisted in this, so he's having these images of the clown costume. So he draws with lipstick this big clown smile on her face. Gosh, going backwards is so weird. And then he just freaking shoves the knife up through the under palate of her chin. And all she says is, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry, everyone. Please don't be mad at me." Like, that's a pretty messed up thing to have go through your mind as you're being killed by this maniac. Like, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry, everyone. Please don't be mad at me." Like that, again, I'm a little bit glassy right now because that really got me. That's the kind of stuff that sticks out to me in horror movies. And that's just one, you know, again, there weren't enough moments like that in this particular series, but that moment right there sort of makes the series worth having been picked up by me. Now, there are some other interesting beats, that the comic does take. And because Lisa ends up being the object of Michael Myers's sort of infatuation in this series, the way Laurie was in the first two movies, you get a couple of interesting beats. One of them comes in issue 3 when actually it's one beat that leads into another. So continuing on the cat thread, one of the things that happens is Lisa and Sean get back to her house, and she's like, oh, I'm still feeling really stressed. And he's like, take a shower. I always feel better when I take a shower. And I don't know why I didn't see it coming, but it led into sort of a gratuitous nudity shower scene in a comic book, which I was not aware was a thing. Apparently I read this once before and I had forgotten that this was a thing, but here we go. What ends up happening is, and I'm going to be careful about showing it, I'm going to cover one of the panels that shows perhaps a little too much. Ooh la la. But what you see here is Michael creeps in and then throws the dead, disemboweled cat into the shower in order to scare her out of the shower. And so she comes out all completely naked. I don't even know if I'm allowed to show it on camera or not. I'm not gonna, but there is nudity in the comic book. I guess you could say full frontal if you really wanted to. But it's weird. So Michael sees her come out of the shower, and it triggers this really, really odd memory where he walks in on his sister, who is, guys, it's a horror show, she's masturbating while on her period. It shows her fingers come back bloody, and like it shows Michael watching from the door. Like his whole, it's actually, when you think about it, psychologically, it's kind of interesting. So you see this, look at that page on the right there. So he sees it and he's like just kind of staring, not sure how to process, right? So it can very easily demonstrate why Michael has this confusion with sex and violence, sex and gore, as it were, or, you know, nudity triggers thoughts of blood. Who knew? You know, who knew? It's actually a pretty interesting addition, again, to the mythos, without being something that is, I don't know, maybe not canon, but still interesting to think about. Now, the other beat I wanted to hit on in this issue was this. So right after that moment, her friend Sean comes and like hears her screaming upstairs, and so he rushes up the stairs, and of course Michael, you know, grabs him at the top of the stairs and very handily just throws him back down the stairs. But then Lisa says, leave him alone. Michael looks back and looks at him. The guy is down at the bottom of the stairs, and then Michael walks down the stairs. Sorry, I'm going backwards here for you guys. And he walks right by the guy, and then for some reason the guy just like, I'm gonna go get him anyway, and then he runs off after Michael. But how interesting is that she said, leave him alone, and Michael looks at her and like just walks right by him and leaves him alone. Unfortunately, Sean is a dumbass. Sean chases after Michael, who leads him into a cemetery where he finds the body of Nikki. And that's a pretty intense moment because it's pretty cool. Michael just comes up behind him and whacks him. Like, again, there's a lot of bad imagery in this. A really cool, like, bad, evil imagery. So he sees the girl that he loves, Nikki, in her grave. Michael comes back and cracks him on the head with the shovel, and then you get to see, you know, this is actually a really badass moment. He gets whacked in the head again, and then he slowly like melts down as his head injury takes effect, and then Michael just finishes him off and just takes off the head with the shovel. So, I mean, that's one of the kills. We're already at a few kills, and they're not bad. So that brings us to the 4th issue of Halloween Nightdance, where we're going to get the resolution and... It's okay! Resolution and conclusion of the story. That was legitimate fear you saw in my eyes there. I hate when I lose control. You guys see, this is how I hold my comics. This is how OCD I am with my comics. So literally all I touch is the edges and barely any of the actual page. Like, that's how I read my books. That's how they stay in as good of condition. I ended up getting my Walking Dead #1 graded, which I bought off the shelf the year it came out in 2003. I got it graded in 2015, and it was a 9.6. I had it for that long, and I take that good of care of my comics. So here we are, issue 4. Totally sidetracked, but yeah, that's why I freaked out. I take good care of my comics, and I don't like dropping them. Anyway, we get the first taste of carnage when, obviously not Ryan and Marcy, because Marcy is no longer with us, but Ryan at this point has encountered Lisa, and they have teamed up because they actually found each other at the very end of issue 3, getting to Marcy's family's house. And this is where we find out how the two groups of characters tie into each other. So Lisa babysat for a kid named Daniel, who she thought was the one sending her the pictures. And it turns out Daniel is the little brother of Marcy, and he and they're both... Okay, so Daniel and Daniel's and Marcy's parents were the ones that had ceased communication with Marcy, which is why they were driving to this town to begin with. Russellville, there we go. So anyway, it all ties together there, and the beginning of this issue, we see Ryan and Lisa going into the house and finding that this was the reason why the family had ceased communication. Big surprise, right? Michael had been there, and he had sliced all of their throats in order to set this whole thing in motion. Interesting, right? Interesting. So the issue progresses, and there's an eventual confrontation between Michael Myers, Ryan, and Lisa. And Ryan is the first to take him on, of course. But before we have the confrontation, we have what is, to my estimation, the coolest kill in the entire book. It's actually it's a continuation of a kill from issue 1. It is Marcy. They finally find Marcy's body, and I know Jason from Sinister Cinema liked this page as well. This is easily the coolest kill, and apparently it's one that's being mimicked in the upcoming 2018 Halloween movie, except it'll be a male instead, supposedly. But what he did to her afterwards is, I'm gonna get real close. He carved her skull out. Look at, you can see right here. Over here. You can see it goes into her eyes. He hollowed out her skull and then put a candle in it like a jack-o'-lantern. So imagine the logistics of that. He not only carved the eyes and the mouth out, he then literally reached in and scooped everything out of her head. Everything that this picture implies, you have to go through in your mind to really get how horrific it really is. It is really terrifying to think about. I don't know that they're going to be able to get that across. I mean, I hope everyone will sort of get it, but that's the thing. You can't just cut out the eyes and the mouth and suddenly the head is hollow. You have to show him digging everything out and like putting it beside and then putting a candle in. God, I hope they show us that in the new movie, because this is disturbing. Look at the mouth. Look at her mouth. He knocked out most of her teeth, except he left some to do that jack-o'-lantern weird teeth pattern that is, you know, just like a few up top and a few down low, spaced out. It's so cool. This is why this art, Tim Seeley's art, is really, really well suited for horror comics. And it makes sense. He does a lot of horror comics. So that is how that kill goes down. Then we have the confrontation between Ryan and Michael. Not much of a confrontation. He pretty much gets whacked in the back of the head while looking at Marcy, his lady love. He gets attacked by Michael while Lisa makes a run for it, and then it doesn't go well for him. He gets bashed in the skull, and then Michael goes ahead. Okay, here we go. Puts the knife in his mouth, and then basically cuts off the dude's tongue, and shoves one of the extra Michael Myers masks that he has on him because the cops have been called at this point, and he basically sends faux Michael out into the line of fire of the police, and of course it does not go well for the gentleman. He takes a shot right through the face, and it ends up with a really cool piece of art down here. And yeah, and then it's basically it comes down to Lisa, who is now having to hide in the space. What we found out, I forgot to mention this, but what we found out in one of the previous issues is that Lisa's trauma was when she was actually babysitting Daniel, the kid that is killed with his family at the beginning of this, or that found dead. She was babysitting him. They happened across an empty cabin in the middle of the woods that was taken by Michael Myers, and the kid fell into this dark hole in the middle of the home, and then she goes down to try and help him, but Michael shuts the lid, and they stay down there for 2 days before they're rescued. So she has a complete fear of the dark. And so in this, the only place, when she runs away, the only place she thinks to escape, they're at that house. So she goes into that same hole and hides down there. Michael finds her and takes her out, knocks her out, and unfortunately, the way it ends for Lisa is she wakes up, and I can't show this because she wakes up naked in an empty grave, and all we see is another sort of fake, it's a cross in the ground with Judith Myers scribbled across. So that's pretty much how it ends. Michael Myers goes and closes the music box that opened at the beginning of issue 1, and that's how the series ends. There you go. That is Halloween Nightdance. And it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not terrible. And the gore in the artwork is definitely interesting and fun. When we get it, there is nudity, if you're a fan of that in horror. So I think if you want to get your hands on it and you're willing to pay the amount of money you have to pay to get your hands on it, it's definitely worth having, especially for you Michael Myers lovers. So check it out. Stay tuned. Part 2 of the comic review series is coming next. That's going to be me talking about this one here, Halloween 30 Years of Terror, which is interesting. It's an anthology book. There are 5 stories, all of which tie into the different Halloween movies. This one was just kind of loose, but these are much more direct tie-ins, including one story all about Laurie Strode. So, I'll be talking about that in part 2. Thank you guys very much for watching. Until next time, I've been Cecil Laird, and remember, stay scared.